Welcome to the All Things Admin, Admin Pro training series. My name is Julie Perrine. I'm the founder and CEO of All Things Admin, and I'm delighted that you're joining us for this month's presentation. Let me introduce our topic and speaker to you, an admin's guide to cybersecurity awareness. If you've been paying attention to the headlines recently, you've probably noticed that cybersecurity and data breaches are becoming more and more a regular headline. And unfortunately, there are things beyond our control sometimes in what we can do to protect ourselves from major events. However, there are some best practices and little things on a day-to-day basis that we can do to be more aware and potentially protect our personal data and our company's data from it getting into the wrong hands. And that's why we have brought in an expert in the field of cybersecurity to present this month's program for us, an admin's guide to cybersecurity awareness. And I'm delighted to introduce you to Spence Witten, who is the Director of Federal Sales at LunarLine. Spence, thank you for joining us this month. We are delighted to have you with us.
Julie, it's a pleasure to be here. You know, I've known you and the All Things Admin team for many years now, and there's no one doing better training, better work on behalf of the admin community. So it's a real honor and pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get started. As Julie mentioned, my name is Spence Witten, and I am LunarLine's Director of Federal Sales. I've been in the business about 10 years. And you know, mostly my job is sales, but they actually make me do some real work too. And in the process of doing real delivery work for clients, you know, I've had to learn a few things about cybersecurity, and I've also you know, being an executive now at a cybersecurity company where I'm a target, and you know, I'm regularly targeted by various cyber attacks. So I've had to you know, learn a lot about you know, how to stay safe online and protect myself, my home, and my company too. And so what are we going to do today? So what's the plan? First, you know, we're going to stick to the basics of cyber hygiene throughout this presentation. So if there are any security nerds in the audience, you're guaranteed to be disappointed. This is going to be the cybersecurity equivalent of, you know, don't take candy from strangers, or you know, make sure to lock your doors, you know, when you leave the house each day. It's really basic stuff. But on the flip side, you know, on the positive side, while it may be basic, implementing some of the tools and techniques that we're going to talk about today will, you know, dramatically improve your own personal security posture, but then also your security practices at your organizations, and then on behalf of the executives you work with and support as admins. So, you know, while it's going to be simple stuff, it will make a big difference for you and for your organizations. And we're also going to focus on affordable solutions. So there's nothing in here that, you know, you can spend a lot of money on cybersecurity. You can spend, you know, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars building advanced security operations centers. That's one of the things that my company LunarLine does. But that's not what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be, again, focused on easy, free solutions, and also solutions that are appropriate for admins and execs at companies of all sizes. You know, if you're working for a giant bank or you're working for a small little mom and pop operation, you know, the things that we're going to talk about are equally applicable to any of those organizations. So here's the agenda. So first I want to talk about, I want to get, you know, communicate that everyone that is viewing this presentation, because of your role in your organization, is a target. And I want to talk a little bit about what that means in the modern cyber world, what it means to be a target in today's cyber environment. I'm going to discuss protecting yourselves and protecting your home life too, and your families, and then I'm going to jump into talking about protecting your company, and then we'll have a, you know, brief Q&A period for Julie to quiz me on the things we learned today. So step one. You are a target. So let's talk about some case studies and talk about what it means to be a target of cyber hackers. So, you know, as an admin, you know, I want the audience to understand that you are a business leader. You know, you are leaders in your organizations. You support and you know, advise very, you know, senior folks within your companies. And, you know, that makes you a target. Everybody knows that, you know, admins in a lot of different capacities are gatekeepers, both to the executives, but also to the systems and data that make a company run on a day-to-day basis. And it's really easy to identify, go through LinkedIn or go through Facebook or search around online and try to figure out, who the administrative assistants and executive assistants for various different corporate leaders are. And so you as the admin community is always going to be, target number one, priority number one for a hacker group trying to break into an organization. But I also want folks to understand that, cyber attacks don't always have to be explicitly targeted. I think we have this conception that, there's these hacker groups out there with this whiteboard with, specific names and faces and companies that, they really want to go after. And, you might think, look in the mirror and think, well, hey, I'm not really that important, nobody's, in Eastern Europe or China or, wherever the major, hacker groups are operating, no one's thinking, hey, they're going to go after me specifically. But the way modern cybercrime works is that it can be largely automated. So groups might not say, I want to target Spence Witten. They'll say, I want to target, mid to senior level personnel in a cybersecurity company, right? And they can set up programs and they can set up scanning tools to go out and look for people that meet that description. And then they can launch attacks automatically. And so a lot of the things, and then once, it's almost like trolling with a fishing net, right? You throw a fishing net off the back of a boat, you just drag it behind you for a while, and eventually you pull it up and you see what you have, what you found. And so, that's the way a lot of modern cybercrime works. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about is focused on making sure that you stay out of that net and that, you don't get dragged up in these kind of ongoing cybersecurity, cyber threat scanning exercises. And then I also want you to realize, again, that you are higher profile than you think. So you might think that, you're, administrative assistant in a mid-sized company and that, no one really, cares about what you do every day. But, that might not be true. You might have, even if your company may be small, you may have really important clients. You may have, be working with government or, political leaders. You might be working with large banks. You might be working with airlines. You might be working with some of the organizations. They might be your clients, some of these organizations that are, really, really highly targeted. So again, just you do some thinking about how you might be higher profile than you realize. And so let's talk a little bit about some specific instances where admins have found themselves in the front lines of cybersecurity. So a really famous attack is called the Francophone attack, since it originated in France. So an admin at a French company was targeted with a phishing attack. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail later. But she essentially got an email that had an invoice, but she was skeptical, right? So she didn't click on this invoice. But immediately after she got this email, she got a phone call from someone who purported to be an executive within her organization and asked her to process that invoice. So she went back, thinking that, hey, I got this email, I got this phone call, this is probably legit, went and clicked on that invoice, and ended up downloading malware to her computer, and a hacker group was able to take over her computer. And because she was an admin to the CEO, they were able to move from her computer pretty much all over the organization and steal quite a bit of intellectual property in the process. This attack was repeated for a company in San Jose, and it ended up, there were nearly $50 million stolen because of that attack. Another, thing I want, we're gonna talk a lot about in this presentation is secure use of the internet, particularly Wi-Fi. And another instance was the group called the Dark Hotel Hackers. So hackers managed to attack Wi-Fi systems at high-end coffee shops and luxury hotels, and used those poisoned hotspots to siphon data from a huge number of senior executives and their admins traveling with them throughout Asia and throughout Europe, and even occasionally in the United States. So it was a wonderful illustration of the dangers of using Wi-Fi. Another thing we're gonna talk about some ways to more securely use Wi-Fi later in the presentation. And these attacks are so easy that an 11-year-old can do it. An 11-year-old kid in Texas won a science fair competition last year for essentially doing that, demonstrating that attack, demonstrating how easy it was to, take over a city's free public Wi-Fi and siphon all sorts of sensitive data. And also want to, reemphasize to the admin community that executives need a lot of help, right? So, this story is about me. I definitely should have known better being in the cybersecurity community, but I sent a link to a video from NBC.com, right? So a perfectly reputable site, and the page actually included an embedded attack. And luckily, I sent it to someone who was within our own internal network that's very heavily defended. I was outside the network at the time, but when I sent the link to her, it tripped our alarms, and we were able to catch it before it wreaked havoc. But again, I mean, it shows how even someone like me, who's steeped in this stuff, does it day in, day out for the last 10 years. Can still make the kind of silly mistakes that can wreak havoc in an organization. And again, we were very lucky because we spend an awful lot of time and money really hardening our network because we're such an obvious target. This may not have been the case for other folks, organizations that don't, aren't as well defended as we are. But again, even folks like me, we need help because again, I really should have known better. All right, so having said that, let's jump into protecting yourself. So I want to emphasize a little primer on online privacy. So, I don't think people always realize how much data your computer not only stores on you and what you're doing, but how it spews that data all over the internet to essentially anybody who's asking. So what you see off to the right here on the screen is a screenshot from an app I use. So I use an app called Disconnect Me, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, that records who's trying to siphon data from me and blocks that data from being siphoned in the first place. So this was just, as you can see, it was 1 week I used it for really just 3 days period for this, to grab this screenshot. And in total, I blocked over 1,000 organizations trying to gather my data, 21 just in the beginning part of the day. And if you look through that list, just the initial list of those 1,000 organizations, you'll see some names you don't even recognize. So double click, some of you will probably recognize that that's Google. So that's a banner ad pulling data from my computer to serve targeted ads. Okay, we're used to that. But who's Unruly Media? Who's QuantServe? Who's KRXD? Who's Scorecard Research? I mean, if you're like me, you probably haven't even heard of these organizations, and yet here they are siphoning data on my activities online without my permission. And doing what with that data, I don't really know. And so again, if you research these organizations, you'll learn that they're data consolidation groups supporting advertisers. But we don't know what they do with our data. They package it, they sell it to whomever they want, and we don't know how well they secure that data. And so, and that's that's a big part of the computer security privacy puzzle, is understanding just how much data your computer constantly spews out. Again, I think a lot of folks think that, hey, as long as I'm surfing just the sites that I usually go to, and I'm not doing anything inappropriate online, or I'm getting rid of my cookies and doing the basic cyber hygiene stuff, nobody sees what I'm doing. And then the reality is that there are, again, over 1,000 organizations in 1 week watching what I did online. And then also I want to give a brief word on encryption before we dive into some of the tips and tricks. So starting with Wi-Fi. So I think a lot of folks, you hear the advice that you really need to put a password on your Wi-Fi. And it's not just denying your neighbor a sweet deal on the internet when you do that. What you're doing with that password is laying the groundwork for some really, really cool encryption that's extremely powerful. And so by putting that password on place, you're encrypting your connection between your computer and the router before it goes out to the public internet, which means that anybody in the vicinity, which can be up to several miles away, can eavesdrop on a Wi-Fi connection, can't read what you're doing because it's encrypted. So even if you're sitting at home, on a Wi-Fi network, and maybe let's say you're have a nice big plot of land, you're on 5 acres in the middle of nowhere, you really still need that wireless password, because it's not simply locking your router so that other people can't access it. It's encrypting your communication stream between your computer and your router. So definitely put that password in place, and we're going to talk about some tips and do's and don'ts about Wi-Fi passwords later. And then I also want to briefly cover HTTPS. So I think everyone knows, you look up a website, you go into the news, you're reading NewYorkTimes.com, you see HTTP, right? And actually, I think the New York Times now is 100% HTTPS, so that wasn't the best example. But most websites are still HTTP. What that essentially means, without getting super technical, is that your communication with that site is in the clear, meaning if somebody was able to eavesdrop or somebody was listening to what you were doing online between your computer and that site, they could conceivably see where you're going, what you're doing, what you're typing into that site. Nothing is secure. It's just all completely in the open. Compare and contrast that with, say, when you log into a bank, right? So if you've ever thought about it, it's really pretty cool that you can go onto a bank's website, you can type in a username, you can type in a password, you can broadcast it over the internet, and you can have that exchange be secure. So if you think back to your childhood, if you ever had a secret code with a friend, right, you had to go through this long process of coming up with the code, coming to an agreement with your friend of what the code was, exchanging that code, and keeping a copy. None of you have ever done that with your banks. You don't have to, because your computers can do it all in the open. They can exchange codes securely over the internet and lock down that transmission. It's really, really cool. I'd love to explain it, but since it involves some of the most complicated math in the world, I won't even bother, because I don't even understand the bit of it myself, other than the fact that it works. And so what that means for you is that you really need to pay attention to sites when you're typing in passwords or you're making financial transactions, that instead of HTTP in front of the website name, you're seeing HTTPS. And you can just think of that S as meaning secure. And again, what that's showing is that communication between your computer and that site is encrypted, so that you can exchange passwords, you can exchange credit card data, you can navigate freely on that site without anyone being able to see what's going on. Largely, this isn't such a big deal anymore, because most sensitive sites like banks and email providers now use HTTPS by default. It didn't used to be like that way. Even just a couple of years ago, Facebook actually, when you would exchange username and passwords was HTTPS, the rest of it, that communication with Facebook wasn't. However, I was trying to buy something a couple of months ago, and when I got to the place where I would type in my financial data, my credit card information, it was still HTTP, and so I knew enough to say, whoa, I'm not going to shop from these folks. But it still happens today that sites haven't properly implemented HTTPS. So definitely pay attention to that as you move around the web. So, and again, I want to emphasize how even reputable sites can cause problems. So, like the example from a couple slides ago where I talked about me sending out a video link to NBC.com and causing a minor incident at work. There's this thing called malvertising. So ads that you'll see along the side of a web page are really pretty fascinating, right? It's not just like an ad in a newspaper that is static. It's just written as is. Have no idea who's going to look at it. Just sitting there on the page, blank, doing nothing. That ad on a website is doing a whole bunch behind the scenes. It's analyzing what's in your browser to figure out what ad to serve you. It's, as you saw with my tracker site, communicating with tons of different companies, sharing data about me, my usage of the internet, whether or not I clicked the ad, whether or not I looked at it. It's that kind of detail. And in the process of doing that, there's a lot of processing and computation that goes on to make that possible. And inside that computation, hackers can embed malicious code, right? Since essentially this is it's not just an ad; it's a program running in your web browser. And this has been, if you visit a site that's running these poisoned ads, they can infect your computer without even clicking on anything, just by virtue of being on that site. Again, kind of like the NBC.com example I gave with the video. There was no click. You didn't have to click on the video for this to be an issue. The page itself was poisoned. And major groups have been hit by this. So Yahoo, MSN, New York Times, Reuters, YouTube, kind of the mainstream sites that you go to on an everyday basis have been hit with these malvertising campaigns. So even just going to sites that are, normally seem normal, seem secure, or just totally above board can cause issues. And so at the bottom of this slide, I showed, again, this was just one day of browsing for me, or 2 days, I guess. And this is just using my computer for work. The basic stuff I do for work. I read industry-related news. I check my email. I wasn't playing around online at the office, and I hit 2 sites that my our internal system flagged as potentially dangerous, right? Most likely these are ads, ad content that our system didn't like. But still, again, I was just doing basic work stuff on my computer, and I had 2 instances where there was potentially something that wasn't quite right with what was going on. So be very cognizant of that as you move around the internet. Even if you're not doing anything weird online, not going to weird sites, just doing day-to-day work-related business, you can still come into contact with cyber threats. And again, even if you don't click on anything. And so, having laid out this, nasty, frightful little scenario of what the online world looks like nowadays, I want to talk to you about some ways that you can start fighting back. So I broke this down into, easy, semi-easy, and hard. But even just doing the easy stuff, we're going to make a big difference in your own personal security posture and in the security posture for the companies you support. So let's start with passwords, right? So passwords are really annoying. I get it. They're a pain. Now we need passwords for everything. Their sites will have big complexity requirements, wanting 10 characters or more with lots of special, symbols. It's gotten out of control, but it's still really important. So length is the single most important factor for a password right now. So what usually happens is a hacker doesn't usually just say, hey, I want to break into Spence's email, so I'm just going to try random passwords, just typing into his login screen. What usually happens is hackers have gained access to an organization and they've stolen all the passwords that organization has. And those passwords are what they call salted and hashed. So it's kind of like encryption. It's a little bit different, but those passwords are protected in when they take them. But now supercomputing has gotten so cheap that they can throw a lot of computing resources at trying to break those passwords. However, as your password gets longer, it gets harder and harder for those computers to break them. So what most criminal groups do, something like 95% of passwords are less than 8 characters long. So they can get a whole lot of value from just breaking those passwords that are less than 8 characters long. If you have a long password, they might not even bother trying to break yours. Because sure, could they? Yeah, given enough time, they probably could, but it's not worth it to them economically when they have millions of other passwords they could try to break. Complexity also matters. It's not as vital as length, but you don't need to go crazy with tons of symbols. But what complexity does do is if you are genuinely concerned that you are as an individual, being directly targeted, somebody really wants to break into your account, complexity does make it that much harder for hacker groups to break in, particularly as you get more and more random. So why the reason folks don't want you to use, or why security experts don't want you to use common dictionary words in your password is that we have programs that are called dictionary attacks that rank order the most popular English language words that are used in passwords and kind of just repeatedly throw them at those passwords in an effort to break them. So that's why you kind of want to move away from using straight normal words. But complexity does up the ante and increase the cost of trying to break that password. You never want to repeat passwords. And the reason for that is we see often lately, it's like every other week, there's a major breach, right? So when yahoo.com got breached, hackers know that, hey, if I have such and such an email address for such and such a person with this password, I wonder, hey, maybe they use that same email address password combination for Facebook. Maybe they use that same email address password, email address and password combination for their bank. And that's why you don't want to repeat passwords, is because when losing your Yahoo account is terrible, but it's exponentially worse if you have that same login combination across a number of different sites, because it's trivial for hackers to program an attack that goes out and just tries those passwords randomly to see who, if you're reusing passwords. And so this is hard. We know in the security community, we really do understand that passwords are a pain. So really consider using a password manager. There are trade-offs, right? It feels weird to, like, an example is LastPass, right? That's the one I use. It can feel really weird to type in all your password data into LastPass. It can make you feel kind of vulnerable, but it's better than trying to repeat. It's definitely better than repeating passwords, and it's a lot better than trying to randomly remember a whole ton of complicated passwords. They are occasionally breached. They tend to do a really good job of responding to those breaches. But it is a trade-off, but we still, again, it's very hard to find a security researcher that won't recommend using a password manager because the pluses definitely outweigh the cons. I know LastPass, like I mentioned, is the one I use. There's a company called Dashlane. There are a lot of them out there. The vast majority of them are free for simple usage. Enterprise usage they charge for it, but definitely look into getting a password manager. And then back that password manager up with two-factor authentication. So two-factor authentication sounds kind of intimidating, but it's really pretty easy. What it means is, in addition to having typing in your username and your password, you're going to be asked for another form of identification. This usually comes in either a phone that can receive special codes that expire after a certain time, or using a USB key that's coded, with a secure key that can validate you in addition to your password. You may have something similar to this at work, where some organizations you have to push in, your ID badge from your office. You have to plug that into your computer in addition to typing your username and password in. That's a form of two-factor authentication. But these days, almost every site, major site that you would use, Facebook, Twitter, a lot of even banks these days, definitely email programs like Gmail, and every password manager I've ever used offer two-factor authentication. What I recommend, for example, what I use, there's a program called Google Authenticator. Google Authenticator is it's really easy to set up. It's actually kind of cool to go through the process. It uses QR codes. The site will show you. You'll say you want to enable two-factor authentication. The site will flash a QR code for you. You just take a picture of that QR code. It syncs with Google Authenticator, and you have a two-factor authentication system ready to go. It works for Amazon. It works for most email. It's a fantastic system. I wish it worked for Facebook. Facebook makes you use Messenger or receive text messages. Getting text messages as a two-factor authentication method isn't quite as great as using a password manager, using something like Google Authenticator, but it still works in a pinch. And then Apple recently, if you're an Apple user, is really pushing two-factor authentication. I think it's almost mandatory now with some of the newer operating systems they have. So that they send a code, 4 or 6-digit code to an iOS device you have, in your possession. And again, fantastic system. Implementing two-factor authentication is probably the single greatest thing you can do as an individual user to improve your security posture. So definitely give it a thought. Antivirus and application firewall. So these are important. Have them on your home computer. Have them on your work computer. Make sure they're up to date. Application firewalls are usually now on Windows and Macs, I think enabled by default. But if they're not, you can search in either one of the search bars on your computer to try and find it if you're curious to see if it's on. With an application firewall, again, it's one of those things that sounds really intimidating, but it's really not that complicated. What it does is it blocks attempts to communicate with your device that are unusual or sort of outside the norm. Definitely make sure you have that enabled. And then you really, on your mobile device, you really want to try to limit your app usage. So if you're, we don't want devices to be unusable. So we understand that, the world's very app-centric and there's some apps that you really depend upon. But some folks I know have, 40, 50 apps on their phone, and they only use 10% of those, right? So, make sure that the apps you aren't using, get rid of them, and, really think carefully about the apps you download and whether or not you really need them. It's very, very difficult to, even for security experts, it's really difficult to understand what your app's collecting and what it's doing with that data. And frankly, they leak. So meaning that, they'll store that data on you, and that data can be handed off even in ways that the app might not necessarily know to either other apps or outside your device. So just be very, very cautious and limited in the number of apps you use and which ones you're using. And then also consider using a different search engine. So I know Google's great, and actually for complicated searches, there's nothing better. If you have to ask a multifaceted search question, I mean, Google's the best, right? But at the same time, Google not only collects a bunch of data on what you're doing, Google sends that data to everybody that you go visit online. So when you go to a site from from a Google search, Google sends data along with you that sort of tells the site you're going to what they know about you. That's not just a privacy issue, it's also a security issue because it makes you easier to target, right? Because you're creating this trail that follows. It's like driving around in a car that, in every different location you visit, you slap a bumper sticker on. Everybody who looks at your car can see that, whether that's your bank, whether or not that's, the private doctor you use, whether that's, a mental health care professional you visit, whether that's a disease you've Googled online. It passes that data from the search engine to the site you're visiting. And that's, it's definitely, it's a little creepy, fine, sure, but it's also a security risk with all that data following around. So, consider something like DuckDuckGo, right? So DuckDuckGo is a search engine that actually sort of, it's kind of a complicated way, it piggybacks on searches that other search engines like Google or Bing run. It consolidates data. It presents just a normal looking search. If you used it, it will look like every other search engine you've ever used, but it doesn't track you and it doesn't pass data to the sites you visit. Again, totally free. It won't, other than it struggles with really complicated searches, but for basic searching, it's fantastic. Consider either making that the default in your browser or just, starting to use it a little bit more than Google, because it is much more secure. And so some more of the easy stuff, right? So this one's hard, but it's really critical. Avoid personal stuff on your work computer. The reason being, as we've discussed in some of the previous slides, is that as you move around the internet, you expose yourself to an awful lot of nastiness. If you're by combining personal stuff and work, you're putting both lives at risk, right? So really try, again, for small companies and cash-strapped folks, it might not be possible. But if you have to do work at home, see if your work will provide a computer for you. Or another great example, I have a tablet, right? I do personal silly stuff on a tablet. I don't do any banking on that. If my tablet's compromised, it's not that big a deal. I keep that isolated. And again, the reason for doing that is that just moving around the internet can expose you to nasty stuff. So, really segregate your work and personal lives. And if you can, have separate devices for them too. Make sure to keep systems and apps updated. So everybody says they do this. I'm guilty of not doing this. Most updates include security fixes. This is especially critical for browsers and, like, say, Adobe products, because those are really, really popular ways to get attacked. The challenge, you oftentimes have to close, for your browser as an example, you oftentimes have to close your browser to get those updates to take. And obviously that's a huge pain, particularly for folks that like to keep 40 tabs open on their browser and don't want to lose that data. But if you never close your browser, it never updates, and that means just each passing day you're just racking up vulnerabilities that all you have to do to fix it is close your browser and restart it, and it would automatically fix itself. But if you never close your browser, those fixes never happen. Same with Adobe products, and frankly, same with your computer. So a lot of times, like, say, Microsoft will download updates in the background. If you never shut your computer off and restart, those updates can't take effect. And then you're just, continuing to stay vulnerable. I mean, again, I've been guilty of this. I've left my computer on for literally months, right? And so that's months of not getting updated. That's months of vulnerabilities that have piled up on me. So, get in the habit, despite the fact that that it can be kind of annoying to have to close everything out, but just get in the habit of, on a fairly regular basis, shutting everything down and restarting so those updates can happen. And then also just pay attention to your public profile. Social media really is the devil, and I use social media. It's a big part of my life. I've tried to get rid of it. I can't. And we'll talk about this when we kind of get into the work stuff. The data you share on social media is A, really easy to siphon up automatically, and B, can lead to some really targeted attacks. So just be, again, from everything from where you bank, if you've liked your bank online, to where you live, who your kids are. I know we've all seen security questions online. What's your wife's maiden name as a security question to reset your password. You can get on my Facebook and figure out my wife's maiden name really quick. So it's just be cognizant of the data you put online, the things you talk about, the things you like, because it does build a record on you that folks can use to go after you if they really want to get to your data. So let's go on to some of the slightly less easy stuff. So encryption. So encryption is really intimidating, right? It's intimidating to experts. However, it has gotten a lot easier. So just as an example, for Macs have a system called File Vault. So if you're a Mac user, it's really easy to encrypt your entire disk. You can enable File Vault, you set a password, and now your hard disk is encrypted. So if someone does not have that password, they cannot get in. That includes even government agencies. It's extremely powerful encryption. I mean, it's the kind of things that it would take, the rest of the years of life on Earth to break the kind of encryption that these systems can implement. And it's really easy. It really is literally just a push button. It slows your computer down a little bit. It slows launching of applications a little bit, but particularly with a more modern computer, if you have a newer computer that's only 1 or 2 years old, it's not a big hit, and now your computer's locked down. Email crypto is a little less easy. It's actually pretty challenging. It's probably not worth it unless you have real special needs or real sensitive clients. But there are systems. An example is Proton Mail. It's called protonmail.ch. Is a encrypted email system that's pretty easy to use. And then, in the work environment, it's the kind of thing, if you really want to set up cryptographically protected email at work, you sort of need IT's help to do it because it is pretty hard. But some of those examples like Proton Mail can work if you just need it for your personal life. You probably don't. I don't use encrypted email. I use Gmail for personal stuff. Gmail is encrypted in storage, and my login to Gmail is encrypted, so I consider that enough. But if you do need cryptographically protected email, that's something you probably have to get an expert to help you with because it is pretty challenging. Something that's actually, again, not as bad as it sounds, but can sort of be irritating as you try to navigate the web, but will really help you avoid some of those incidental attacks that we talked about, where you just happen to visit a site and be through malvertising get attacked, is locking down your browser. This involves disabling Flash. So Flash is terrible. It's a major avenue for attacks. Disable it so it doesn't run automatically. If you go to a site that requires Flash, yes, there's going to be another step. You're going to have to, for example, on Chrome, you're going to have to go up to the little search bar and right-click on the icon and say enable Flash for this site. But shutting down Flash so it doesn't run automatically will, immediately double your website, your web browser security. Definitely require permissions for plugins. In settings, it's almost always a box that you can click to require permission, and that keeps websites from automatically plugging in new programs into your browser that could be malicious. Definitely don't automatically open downloads. Set it so that you have to click. After you download something, you have to click. This will protect you in case your computer inadvertently downloads something. If you don't open it, then you might avoid being compromised. Avoid cookies. So cookies are those bumper stickers I talked about in the previous slide. They advertise where you've been, and they follow you around, and they communicate with every site you visit, letting them know where you've been, where you've come from, what you've been doing online. Other folks can see that, and they can see things, again, like where you bank, where you work, and so you should probably avoid cookies. It's getting harder. Sites are sort of automatically installing cookies, and so I also enable, and I'm a big Chrome user, and in Chrome there's a setting to erase content when you close. Again, it's a little bit of a pain because that content will also be your stored passwords. However, if you use a password manager, it won't matter because the password manager will take care of that for you. But by erasing content when closed, while I've still collected cookies throughout my limited browsing session, they're all gone by the time I start over again. So at least I'm not accumulating them over time. And that'll also get rid of downloads. It'll get rid of any weird plugins you have. It also, really helps clean up your browser from anything, inadvertent that you collected as you've been navigating the web. Some really good plugins can help with this. So there's a plugin called NoScript. NoScript, I think it only works on Firefox. What NoScript does is it prevents scripts like Flash or like JavaScript from automatically running. And actually, I should say that to say browser lockdown too. you should disable JavaScript. And so that's a setting in a web browser. Again, I know it can sound really intimidating, but if you go into settings and you fish around in options for a little bit, you'll see an opportunity to disable JavaScript. This will break most websites. So you will have to, if you go to a website and it loads funny or it refuses to load, you will have to go up in the top corner and say, run JavaScript for, this site temporarily. But that will also immediately improve your security just moving around the web, right? So this is particularly critical for those poisoned ads we talk about. If you don't have JavaScript running on your computer, those don't work. JavaScript is that, kind of really nifty backend language on a web browser that lets those kind of cool programs interact with your browser. If you're not running with it, attackers can't, your attack surface on your browser is, in the security lingo, is a lot tighter. So NoScript will take care of those kind of issues. HTTPS everywhere is also great, because what that'll do is it'll force a website to talk to you in HTTPS if it can. So most websites have HTTPS as an option, but they don't do it by default because it is a little bit harder for them. It's the bandwidth issue. There are bandwidth issues for them. Their websites slow down a little bit, so they don't enable it by default. But HTTPS everywhere forces websites that have HTTPS to talk to you only in HTTPS. Brilliant little plugin. It's another one that's for Firefox. I think actually it is also on Chrome, but a great plugin. Disconnect. So we'll talk about Disconnect a little bit. That tracker I showed you that was tracking the organizations that were siphoning data from my computer, that's actually from Disconnect. So what Disconnect does, actually there's a couple of different services that Disconnect offers. One of them is that tracker blocker system. Another that's really cool is they let you anonymously use search engines. So for example, you can use Bing completely anonymously. It will route your Bing search through one of their servers, so it doesn't look like it's coming from your computer, and it doesn't collect cookies and various different data as you run those searches. Really, really awesome product. And then another one that's really controversial, but I think is critical, are installing a good ad blocker. Every browser has ad blocking options. Yes, you'll go to some publications that will, complain that you have an ad blocker installed or make you temporarily disable it. And, that's your choice. You can do it. But what an ad blocker does is it blocks those malicious ads. And so when in an environment where ads are a great avenue for attacking your computer and also, siphon all this data and, for about what you're doing online, an ad blocker will protect you from all that. So again, yes, I realize they're controversial. I realize publications don't like them because that's how they provide a service, and I understand it. But it's fair for us to install them and choose when to disable them on a site-by-site basis, since ads are just so messy from a security perspective. And then, so some more slightly less easy stuff. So you really want to back up your computer. And a big reason for this is that if you do get hacked, or your computer does, you do get some malware on your computer, sometimes it really is easier just to trash your computer and start from scratch. That is much less of an issue, obviously, if you have your files properly backed up. I recommend trying to use both on-site and off-site options. This is getting easier and easier as both Microsoft and Apple offer really convenient cloud-based storage solutions, but there are others on there. Dropbox. There are even programs there are even services that will, image your whole computer and store it in the cloud for you, even with versioning, kind of like Time Machine for Apple users, but in the cloud. They're great. Read reviews, buyer beware. Make sure you vet the service providers before you go with one, but it's just a great security blanket. As a Mac user, I use Time Machine locally. So at home, I have Time Machine backed up to a little hard drive that I bought for $100 at Best Buy. But I also use iCloud, which is just a seamless way of backing up all my files to iCloud too. And then we use a provider for work for professional stuff. So when you go offsite, if you use an offsite solution, use strong encryption. So I don't expect you to memorize what all the different encryption standards are, but AES 256, write that down somewhere and remember it. That's the gold standard for encryption. AES 128 is okay. In fact, some security nerds would probably argue that it's better. Regardless, if you don't see AES in the or in one of those numbers in the type of encryption being advertised by the storage provider, be skeptical. And look for one that does the path of least resistance is to just look for a provider that has one of those two options, and ensure that your data is protected in the cloud. And ideally, pick a provider that can't even see your data, because if they can't see your data, if they get hacked, hackers can't see your data either. The downside being that you really have to remember your password, because if you forget your password, there's nothing they can do to help you out. And then let's talk a little bit about secure use of Wi-Fi. So this is a big one that very few people do, right? So when you buy a router, your router has an IP address. It can be accessed from the internet. So make sure you change the default password that comes with that router. Make sure it's one of those long, complicated passwords, because it's really easy to scan the internet and look for routers and automatically try default passwords on routers to try to break in, because so few people change the default password on their router. Pick WPA2 encryption. This is one of the things that really irritates me about Wi-Fi routers, because it's very difficult to understand if you're not a security professional. They'll give you a lot of different options for encryption, particularly older routers. An example being WEP, right? So WEP encryption is useless. It shouldn't even be an option, right? It's almost as bad as not having a password, not having encryption at all. WPA is a little bit dated, right? And then so you really want to pick WPA2, but it's not necessarily obvious to lay folks that that's what you want to choose. So go back and look at your Wi-Fi router and make sure that the encryption regime you've chosen is WPA2, because that is currently the best available for home routers. You really want to hide your SSID, which is your router name, right? So you really don't want to be broadcasting your router name to the world, because it makes it easier to scan, right? It's not really. I don't want to say your router is secure if you don't, because I don't want to make it sound like hackers can't find your network. They can, even if your network is hidden, but it is an extra step for them. So it's just a good practice to hide that SSID name, and so that you have to type it in manually instead of just going down the list. And also pick a unique name. So a common practice for hackers, particularly targeting hotels and public Wi-Fi, is to set up their own poisoned hotspot and then just use a name like home network, right? Because everybody calls their home network. And so if your computer is looking for a network called home network and it's set up to automatically connect, it'll just automatically connect to that poison router named home network. But if you picked some unique name, even a modification of your street address, or a pet's name, I mean, it doesn't have to be secure, just unique, your computer won't automatically be constantly scanning and trying to connect to networks that use common names. So again, that's just an easy way to keep your computer from inadvertently hopping onto a poisoned hotspot. And then use extreme caution on public Wi-Fi. I would go so far as to say, unless you are a security pro and really know the ins and outs of public Wi-Fi, you absolutely shouldn't be on it. I recognize there are emergencies and sometimes you have to check email at a coffee shop. Some security folks will say that because you're using an HTTPS connection when you check your email, that you can do that securely over public Wi-Fi. And technically that's correct, but there are so many caveats to that unless you know those caveats backwards and forwards, the safest route is to just not use public Wi-Fi. If you are dependent on Wi-Fi when you're traveling for work, get your work to give you a hotspot. If it's that critical for you, that means it's critical for them. They can, get you a Verizon or an AT&T hotspot, or they can let you, upgrade your phone so that you can have a hotspot. It is just infinitely more secure than sitting at Starbucks on public Wi-Fi, just because there are so many ways that can go wrong. So again, and if you have to use public Wi-Fi, just be super careful. Be very, very clear about what network you're joining. Make sure it's the right one. Make sure your computer is not trying to connect to a network it thinks it knows. And really try to only use sites that are HTTPS and secured that way. And also, just if you can avoid it, don't download anything over public Wi-Fi. It's too easy for attackers to they call it man in the middle, right? It's too easy for them to hop in the middle of that public Wi-Fi connection and send you a fake download instead of what you think you're downloading. So again, really limited use, and just don't download anything stay on HTTPS and get off that public Wi-Fi as soon as you can. This stuff's hard, but it's good for DIYers, or if you, let's say you have kids that are, technologically inclined and they need a weekend activity. But it's really smart to segment your home network. It sounds complicated, but all it means is putting different devices on different channels, right? So the computer that your kids use to do God knows what doesn't need to be on the computer or on the network that you do your banking on. Likewise, your Internet of Things, right? So if you have to have a refrigerator that can talk to your coffee pot, they really shouldn't be sitting on the same channel as your work computer. Because as we talked about, when you put a password in place on Wi-Fi, you're encrypting that communication channel. But if everybody's sitting on the same channel, everybody can talk to everybody else. And you really don't want those devices talking to each other. And you really want to think about, what devices do we do sensitive stuff on, pay the mortgage, look up medical stuff, do work emails on. Make sure those are segmented from some of the other stuff that goes on your network. This usually requires buying a fancy router that enables this. They aren't super cheap. Maybe it's something you can work into getting for you, since it really does help secure your work environment if you have a telework policy. But it's usually about $300 to $500. And again, it's tricky. It's not super easy to do this. But it is great for a DIY project if you need a weekend activity to try to set one of these networks up at home. There's also a product, I've never used it, but in just researching to prepare for this presentation, I found it looking around. It's a router called Cujo, C-U-J-O. It's about $100 plus a subscription fee, and it seems to provide basic network segmentation and firewall for home networks. It could be interesting, and it looks a little bit easier to set up. And this stuff's really hard, right? So always VPN, virtual private network, is an awesome technology. What it does is it encrypts every single thing from your computer out to a designated drop point, usually a server hiding somewhere else offsite. And then from that server, you can go out to the public internet. It's a great tool for privacy. It's a wonderful tool for security. VPN is really the only way to use public Wi-Fi securely, because every little bit of data is encrypted, not just from your computer to the router, but from your computer to the router out to the main internet. It's a wonderful tool. It can be very difficult to use. It can be very temperamental. It's the kind of thing, if you do a lot of telework and you have an IT department, get them to set it up for you and manage it, because it is kind of hard. I don't even try to manage our enterprise VPN. I let IT do that for me. It's just that much of a pain. There are cool tools, though, for personal use. We've talked a lot about Disconnect. I'm a big fan. Disconnect offers a VPN both for your computer and your phone. It's stupid easy to use. And right now my phone is telling the world I'm in Germany, because I'm connected by a secure encrypted tunnel to a server in Germany and doing all my web browsing from there. And I just push button. I downloaded it. I push the button from where I want my secure server to be. It's set up, ready to go. Not necessarily great for work use, but for personal use, it's fantastic. And again, if you really are doing a lot of public Wi-Fi work and there's no way, you can't get away from that, it's the only, it's your only option, definitely download a VPN, because it is really the only way to use public Wi-Fi securely. All right, so let's talk about protecting your executive once you're at the office. So this is taking some of the tips we've learned from personal use and bringing those to work to safeguard your office. So first, I want to start by talking about how we break into companies, because I think it'll give you a little bit of insight into what you need to do to help protect your company. So one of the things my company does is we get hired to break into companies to test their security. We almost always go after personnel first. It is just the easiest way to get in. We can do that with phishing emails, which are fake emails designed to trick you into clicking on something or going to a fake website. We use attacks on social media, either directly or just by gathering data about targets on social media. We'll do pretexting, which is simply calling someone on the phone and getting them to do something. Pretending we're members of IT or part of the janitorial services group and need you to let us in somewhere. We'll leave poisoned USBs. We'll just leave a USB in the bathroom or in the parking lot and see somebody's guaranteed to plug it in and see what's on it, and bam, we're in. Or we'll use watering hole attacks, right? We'll understand where on the internet your groups go. So for example, I work in federal contracting, right? So I probably visit federal contracting related news sites. Attackers know that, right? And they can set up, poisoned ads or various different attacks on newsletters or sites to where they know folks like me are going to visit. And those are all really easy to set up. And it's only if those attacks fail do we, get crazy with, super complicated attacks to try to break into a network. They never fail. We can always get somebody to click on anything, or we can always get somebody to tell us something on the phone they shouldn't have. And I think that really helps folks understand where the threat comes from and hopefully understand their own personal responsibility for being vigilant on a day-to-day basis, looking out for folks like us trying to break in. So some rules for executives, right? And this is, obviously going to be a push-pull with the executive use support, but they really absolutely, under no circumstances, should do personal stuff on their work computers. If they're executives in their organization, they can either afford to buy for themselves or the company can buy for them a simple netbook or a tablet or something that's separate from their work computer for, doing personal stuff or checking personal email or, reading the news. Keep that stuff off the work computer, particularly for executives. The internet is just such a dangerous place that you really need to limit that attack surface and use personal devices for personal stuff. And again, this is another. We talked about segregating Wi-Fi. Execs, particularly in high-profile areas like human resources or finance, they need to be on separate networks. So if you're even at a smaller or mid-sized organization, the kind of organization that's big enough to have a dedicated IT department, if you're supporting, say, the CEO and you know that they're not on a separate network, be an advocate. Talk to your boss or go straight talk to IT. Explain the risks of having everybody on the same channel and convince your organization to segregate out key folks on their own dedicated networks. Not only is that more secure, it's also easier to monitor. So if I'm really concerned about our executive suite getting attacked, if they're on a separate network, it's a lot easier to monitor what's going on. It's a lot easier to tell if they've been attacked, and it's a lot easier to deal with it once they have because it's isolated. And same with other breaches, right? So if, let's say the receptionist clicks on, a random email and all of a sudden gets attacked. If the receptionist is on a separate network from the CEO, that attack is now contained. Likewise, if guests come to the office and want to sign on to a network, give them their own guest network. If they're signing on to the main network, you have no idea what's on their computer, where they've been, if they practice safe security, safe browsing habits, make sure they're on a separate network where that touches nothing else. It just will dramatically improve the security of your organization. And you really should, push this with your bosses that they need to be on separate computers and separate networks. Teach secure Wi-Fi. The same rules apply that we talked about for your own personal use. But now that you're an expert in this stuff, try to instill that culture in the executives you support, and encourage use of personal hotspots. Right. So again, for the average user, a personal hotspot might be cost prohibitive, but for an executive at a company, particularly if they travel a lot, there's no excuse for that company not to pay the $100 and get the subscription to have them a Verizon or AT&T hotspot. It is 1,000,000 times more secure than using public Wi-Fi. Or hotel Wi-Fi, as we talked about in one of the earlier slides, where hotel Wi-Fi was targeted to go after executives. So get the executives you support, and yourself too, right? I mean, you're as critical as they are. So make sure that that's the same for you. If you're constantly on public Wi-Fi talking to your boss, be on a personal hotspot instead. And then emphasize safe browsing and downloading. Communicate the risks of opening attachments. Every single time you see an attachment in an email, don't trust it. I mean, it doesn't matter if it comes from your grandmother. Actually, perhaps particularly if it comes from your grandmother. Don't ever trust attachments, right? Click on them with extreme caution. If you have any doubt at all, call the person who sent it to you and make sure that they actually sent it to you, because that is the #1 way that we're breaking into organizations is through poison attachments and emails. It's just too easy. If you have any doubt, like let's say you've downloaded an attachment and you're like, oh, I don't know, maybe this was dangerous. There's a site called VirusTotal. It's this little picture down here in the bottom of this slide. Google VirusTotal. I believe it's probably virustotal.com. Go there, upload the file. VirusTotal will tell you, if there's a known if that's includes a known malicious payload or not. It's not 100%. It can be a little bit outdated sometimes, but it's a measure of security if you think you've downloaded something inappropriately, and show that to your boss. If they download an invoice or a pricing spreadsheet or some random attachment, and all of a sudden they're scratching their heads wondering if it was safe, VirusTotal can tell them if it's bad or not. And then understand that it really does take a village to keep a network and a company secure. So like we mentioned in the last slide, really push for network segmentation. For yourselves, for your bosses, help them manage their passwords, right? So if you're supporting an executive who's just not super tech savvy, help get them set up, or definitely work with IT to do this, but help get them set up in a password manager. Ultimately, there's some setup time, right? But ultimately, it's going to make their life easier, and they're going to be happy. Pay attention to their social media too, right? So discourage TMI on social media from executives. Point out that maybe they shouldn't be talking about where they go on vacation, or shouldn't be checking in at their bank, or they maybe shouldn't be broadcasting their kids' birthdays. I mean, all that kind of is the data that we can collect on a target and use to break into their accounts or to send them targeted phishing emails. I mean, if I know who your dentist is, it's really easy for me to send a quick email that you're guaranteed to click on, because I can make it look like it came from your dentist. And so help your executives understand that they really need to be cautious on social media about what they pass around. Focus on securing their travel, especially internationally. So if your executive is traveling, Asia, the Middle East, Europe, anywhere, South America, if they're traveling internationally from the United States, do a little bit of prep work ahead of time. The best thing you can do is give them a clean laptop that is just to be used for travel. Make sure they understand that international travelers, particularly business executives, are prime targets. Give them, if you can, prepaid phones are great for travel. You just get rid of them when you're done. Set them up with separate hotspots. Work with IT if you have an IT department to ensure that your exec is equipped for travel. When they get back from the United States, make sure that those computer devices, they go straight from the airport into IT's hand to be wiped and never connect to the network. So many attacks are picked up overseas and then brought back home. And when an exec plugs into an internal network, the internal network is now compromised because they picked up something overseas. Admins can play a huge role in making sure that the execs are equipped with, fresh equipment, clean equipment to travel overseas, and to oversee the process of sanitizing that equipment once it gets it back. Again, I don't expect folks to know how to do that. I don't expect admins to know how to wipe a computer securely, but you can ride herd on IT to make sure that someone there is paying attention to this and cleaning up those devices prior to getting reconnected to the network. And then also help, we talked about the challenges of updating. So if you know that your boss leaves their computer on all day, all night, all weekend, talk to them about shutting it down, and maybe get their permission to Friday afternoon when they leave for the weekend, shutting that down, and so that those updates can install. Again, it may be a major way easy way to improve your executive's security posture. And that is the end. So Julie, any questions?
Oh, I've got a whole list of questions for you.
Fire away. I'm here. I'm all yours.
Well, with the Equifax data breach here in the last few weeks, there's obviously been a lot of articles and things floating around about this. This actually is a topic my husband and I talk about on a pretty regular basis anyway. So I had a few things that I had been saving up to get around to reading someday when I had time. And with the Equifax data breach, I quickly pulled that file out and was trying to brush up very quickly. And there was this article I had found from Forbes back in December of last year that talked about how hackers are hijacking phone numbers and breaking into email and bank accounts using your cell phone number. And what they were recommending was actually setting up separate email accounts that you use, like one specifically as your primary email, certainly, but then like a separate email that's associated with your mobile carrier, and then like a third email that's associated with like online banking or Facebook or Dropbox or tools that you're using like that, so that with that two-factor authentication, if they are able to get a hold of your phone number, they can potentially send information to you that would cause you to respond or compromise your security. So is there any tips or tidbits that you have related to that you can share that you would recommend?
Yeah, so those attacks are rare. So if what actually the advice that Forbes gave is pretty much spot on. So if you're concerned about that, that's what you need to do. You need to have separate login credentials, meaning dedicated email addresses for specific activities, and email addresses that never get passed around. So it becomes really easy to associate. So like my personal email is associated with so much stuff online, it's really easy for someone to guess that I might use that to log into my bank. The truth is I don't, right? I have a dedicated email address that I never use for anything other than signing up for personal services like that. So it makes it really easy, it makes it really difficult to try to steal a phone number. So that is a good practice. I understand, it's one of those things I understand that can be annoying for folks, but yeah, it's smart to, pick up random email provider live.com and create a, random live email account that you use for banking or cell phones will make a difference, right? It'll make those kind of attacks a lot harder. On the cell phone number part, that's one of the reasons why we really don't recommend using text message two-factor authentication. So it is difficult. Somebody has to really want to go after you personally as an individual, but it is possible to redirect text messages that are intended for your phone and send them somewhere else. And there have been successful attacks where people have broken into people's social media and email accounts by redirecting a text message-based two-factor authentication system.
Right.
It's very sophisticated, but it does happen. The way to avoid that is to not use cell phone, text message-based two-factor authentication. Use something like Google Authenticator.
Right. The other thing it recommended was adding a passcode to your mobile phone account, so that if you get a customer service rep who isn't really up on the company's best practices about how to verify they actually have the right person on the other end of the phone, if somebody gets your number and tries to call and pretend they're you and get information or get it changed, that if there's a passcode that you can actually set up or put on your mobile phone, that's another way, that just another layer to secure it a little bit, which I thought was a good tip too.
That's a great tip.
The other thing that I just literally yesterday got an email from my insurance company, and it was on social engineering fraud coverage for insurance. And I just share this more as another way admins can be paying attention and make sure that they are asking the right questions, or even if you don't have to know the answer, as long as you're asking the right questions to get the other people thinking about it. But what this was pointing out was that social engineering fraud is obviously becoming more common, but it said a lot of cyber policies that companies have do not cover social engineering fraud. It's covered under a different type of policy. So paying attention to making sure your company knows what types of insurance coverages they have for these types of attacks is really important, because not everything is as obvious as the way it's named sometimes in what it actually covers. So I thought that was a good thing to just pay attention to also.
So that's a brilliant suggestion. And so, where admins can really help is, some admins have an enormous amount of authority over, who attends various different meetings and who gets involved and invited to critical issues. And so if you're, seeing that somebody's looking in at cyber insurance is so complicated, and it oftentimes gets, sent over to, say, a general counsel or an outside counsel to try to figure out. And all due respect to lawyers, sometimes they're not necessarily always up on all the cyber various different cyber challenges, and they're not IT folks. And so you as an admin can help make sure that your executives are getting the best advice from a broad audience. And so maybe make sure that the head of IT has a say in what the cyber insurance policy is, or at least gets an opportunity to read it, so that because they can catch things like that a lawyer might miss.
Absolutely. So another question that came up, and this was when I logged into my bank the other day, they had tips and tidbits about things you should be paying attention to, especially with the Equifax data breach. And one of the things that popped up for me is there was a line in here that said, remember your loved ones, be sure that they're going through and making sure that they're protected as well. My mom died about a year ago, and I got thinking, I'm like, well, her information could potentially be at risk in this data breach as well. How do you protect somebody who's no longer with you from becoming, they could use her name, her social security number, her details that they have probably in that file of information. What do you do to protect people who are no longer alive?
Wow, I have never gotten that question before. That's a fantastic one. So my best my best guess is that, you know, for a situation like that, and, you know, my condolences on your mother for, you know, her passing, that, you know, you might be able to run a credit report on them and, you know, freeze their credit just like you could freeze your own.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's an excellent question. I've never gotten that one. I've never tried. I will, you know, actually, I'm really genuinely curious. I might call and, you know, call one of the credit unions and, or sorry, one of the credit bureaus and try to figure that out.
Okay, well, I plan to do some research myself, but yeah.
Yeah, one of them I can't say who, but one of them is our client, not the one that got hacked. But I might be able to get a good answer from them.
Perfect. So you were talking about setting up a password for your Wi-Fi. When I used to work for an internet security company, and one of the gentlemen who worked there who did all of our administration stuff was very good at educating me on a lot of these key terms and things. And at that time, and this was a good 10, 12 years ago now, he said it was a lot safer to have your home network set up so that it connects. Is it called the MAC address?
Yep.
Of the machines versus having a password. So when I had my router set up, and I did all the setup myself with his coaching, I had every device that we connected, I would go in and manually put in that MAC address so that that's how they connected. So when people came to my house, they couldn't connect unless I manually went in and added them to my network. Is that still a best practice, or is just a really good password just as good in hiding the SSID number?
So it's gotten, so it is, it's one of those things, it's not a bad idea. It's gotten very, very easy to, they call it spoofing a MAC address. So anybody who, it's actually really easy to do. It isn't, so if somebody wants to break into your network, it's pretty easy. What it will do is it will prevent sort of drive-by connections. So if somebody, is an example, right? So let's say, you know, a friend comes over with their laptop and they pop open their laptop. It won't be able to automatically connect, and so you'd be protected if they, you know, had something nasty on their computer. Because it won't automatically connect to the network. But as in terms of, you know, we're really not supposed to say that it secures things, because it for a hacker it's really trivial to fake that. But it's still not a bad idea. What is really critical, and what wasn't sort of an issue 10 years ago, we didn't have random, you know, VCRs that connected to the internet, right?
Right.
That network segmentation is becoming increasingly critical, and sadly, which is just unfortunate, you know, the major providers haven't made it, you know, like Apple and, you know, that make easy, nice, beautiful routers, you know, haven't made it super easy to do that. That's become the kind of new MAC address thing. I mean, that's the thing you really want to do. You really want to make sure that your coffee maker is not on the same computer network that your work computer is. And so that's become much more critical than MAC address identification, though it's still not a bad idea.
Got it. So then my last question, and this is one of those you were talking about with Chrome, there's a setting where you can erase content when it closes. That's one I definitely need to turn on. But so my husband is religious about going in and clearing the browsing history and whatever after each session when he's on the internet. So he gets an A++ for that. I don't always do that, either time, memory, or I just get lazy, whatever. So how much risk am I still putting him at, even though we're using different computers, when I don't do that religiously, but he does? Am I counterbalancing his good habits with my bad habits?
You know, true. It's less of a risk thing, right? So, your husband erasing all the content isn't necessarily making y'all's lives more secure. What it is, it's important from a privacy perspective, but at the same time, I mean, your IP address from your router and your IP address from, you know, your home is still collecting data, is still being collected on that specific IP address about what you're doing online. So you're not putting him at risk by collecting cookies. You're just accumulating a record that is a little bit easier to search and review. It really, truthfully, I mean, clearing out cookies and web content is more of, we talked about it in the same vein as security, but it's more of a privacy issue than it is a security issue. It doesn't help, you know, even if I had spent my entire browsing history was on, you know, my, you know, computer, and I had cookies going back a year, it wouldn't really help somebody it wouldn't really help somebody go after me. I mean, there's some data in there that would be helpful, like, again, the banks I go to and the sites I visit that might help me tailor an attack, but you could get that data anyway. So you're not really putting yourself at risk, nor is he really protecting himself by doing that.
Got it.
But it is still, I mean, it's one of those things, it's sort of like MAC address identification, right? It's one of those things that falls into, it's a good idea just so that you're not accumulating this, huge record on yourself, but at the same time, I mean, don't think that you're securing yourself by doing that.
Absolutely. Well, as somebody who has had their personal stuff compromised from the banking side of things, and knowing what a disaster that was, trying to get it fixed, and it wasn't even as major as it could have been, I am very appreciative of the things you've shared and the tips and the insights, because this is a big deal, and just because you may or may not have been affected by the most recent data breach, in this day and age, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and that's both personally and corporately. So this has been a very valuable and insightful topic for us to share for everybody who is participating this month. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. My pleasure.
So if people have questions or want to get their company IT departments in touch with your company about potential services or things that they may need that you guys provide, how can they do that?
So the easiest way to, if they have any questions, and I don't know if there's an email address for the Admin Pro training series, I'm happy to take individual questions, and field them as fast as I can if viewers have any questions, later on. Lunarline.com, my company's Lunarline, Lunarline. So lunarline.com is our website, and there's options on that website for contacting specific groups within the company if there any urgent follow-ups, based on, or if the IT departments need to talk to us, they can get to the right person through there.
Perfect. And that website is also on the bottom of the cybersecurity tips handout that accompanies this month's presentation, so you can find it there as well.
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank each of you for investing your time and energy and joining us for this presentation. That concludes our webinar. Thanks again for participating, and we look forward to seeing you again next month. Have a productive finish to your day.